"There is no coming to consciousness without pain." This quote reflects Jung's belief that the process of becoming aware of one's own subconscious self often involves facing difficult and painful truths. Confronting and integrating these aspects was to achieve individuation, but to the ancients, this learning by way of experience was Gnosis. There are many variations of the initiation process throughout the world, but each of them has a common theme: darkness, taming the turbulence by mastering the fear-oriented self. Thousands of years ago, a young man was once recommended as an aspirant by a high initiate of the secret school, long before his name became common household lingo. He was soon after put on a strict diet and brought to the court of the pharaoh to be taught an immense course on geometry, architecture, astronomy, and mathematics that would indeed be difficult for anyone with a modern degree. The aspirant had to remain unwavering in his focus, as this class did not pause to let him catch up. He was then offered the crown by the king himself, but immediately rejected this offer, throwing the crown to the ground and exclaiming, "Mithras alone is my crown." The king then struck him in the head, and he was mummified while alive. And why mummified? Well, the young aspirant was about to find out. The initiates brought him to the entrance of a subterranean vault and opened the gates, where he was instructed to drink from a bowl of extremely pungent and bitter liquid, and make no mistake, every drop was consumed by the aspirant. He walked past the entrance labeled Gate of Death and into the underground labyrinth, unknowing of what was to come specifically, but knowing nonetheless that this would be the worst few months of his life. Within the subterranean vault, he began to encounter ghastly creatures and phantoms of the darkness that seemed never-ending. He was left alone and abandoned, with no companion besides his own reflecting thoughts and footsteps, to face and overcome these ghosts of his own soul. But this party just began, because he then spent months surviving within this vast palace of dank, encountering reptiles and scorpions that he couldn't see any better than his papyrus sheets and pen. The venom of the creatures was removed, but certainly not their fangs. So basically fear factor without any chance of leaving to sign a waiver. If he failed at this part, he would die and be forgotten. With only himself to bear, he wrote on his papyrus whatever came to his mind, and this writing might have been the only tool keeping him sharp, because just as his psyche was about to break, he emerged from the labyrinth and into daylight for the first time in what seemed like chasms of time. No later, and just as swiftly, was instructed to take an exam on what he learned in that prior course that he was taught before walking all the way through hell and back. If he was able to maintain his wits over the course of that nightmare, he would pass the exam and move on to the next phase. He was served a feast hosted by beautiful women who made several solid attempts to cast their virginities onto him, but to no avail, as he was not interested in the appetites of the flesh. A test probably more difficult than the scorpion pit fear factor deal, if we're being honest. He was now a master of what would be called the lesser mysteries. He would later be taken to a grand gallery of towering columns chiseled with the wisdom of the initiates before him, and was finally told the deeper meaning of God's name and attributes, as well as the real reason geometry exists as it does in this world. He was also told about the untold history of the many risings and falls of the human race and the golden ages of antiquity. There were, at this point, no secrets kept from him. Ages of collected wisdom were now given freely to the young man, who we will all come to know by first name. If he is able to comprehend the truth bombs dropped on him at this time, he is granted what was called a circumcision of the tongue. A metaphor, of course, being that he was now permitted to speak of this knowledge to the masses however he saw fit. And this freedom of speech came in handy when he went on to write the book of Genesis, because its author, the once aspirant named Moses, was now an initiate of the greater mysteries and cosmic understanding. He was now enabled to shape a great eon of the world to how he saw fit, an eon of time that we live within to this day. Let's look at the word priest kings. We have priest, which is an intermediate between the divine and the people. That's really become derailed in modern times. And we have the word king, which is a ruler that makes laws, a politician, so to speak. So that one was not only derailed, but a complete train wreck, to put it gently. In the days of early dynastic Egypt, of Amun, of Thebes, there was no difference between the two. The natural law of God was also the law on earth. This is a pretty good deal if you can do it right, without using divine word to push your own agenda. The priest kings were not thought to be gods like we were told in school. That was meant to make these extremely advanced people look like savages, and it worked really good for a long time. They were, however, considered to be the embodiment of the natural law of God on earth, as they were found to be qualified for that rep position. Qualified because they themselves followed the law to a T and led by example. Again, we have really come derailed. The pharaohs performed religious rituals to keep the kundalini popping and the veil between heaven and earth thin. And when you see the layout, construction, and purpose in Old Egypt, it is harder and harder to claim that these rituals didn't work. Egypt stood tall at least triple the amount of time that our society has been in place. And we now know that slaves were not used and were assumed because their architecture is frankly impossible. Manly P. Hall wrote the words, "Science and theology are two ends of a single truth, but the world will never receive the full benefits of their investigations until they have made peace with each other and labor hand in hand for the accomplishment of the great work, the liberation of spirit and intelligence from the three-dimensional prison, ignorance, superstition, and fear." Every religion has something in common with archaeology. They are seeking what was once lost in ages past. And in this way, they are on a quest for a once real reality that has been buried by the modern times of illusions. This quest is indeed the birthright of man. We are meant to find a balance in a sphere of unbalance. This is the great work that can never be truly finished, because there is no finish line in the game of evolution, considering that the only constant is change. Just as King David gave his son King Solomon the task of working on his temple that could never be completed, each generation gives the next one the gift of work in building parts upon that very temple, metaphorically speaking, of course. But the building of this parabolic temple is only hard because the reality of the situation is that man is a creature of attitude and desires. He is a servant of impressions and opinions. With this wavering of the unbalanced mind, we cannot attain the qualities necessary to improve upon the great work. This is the reason that a lot of ancient wisdom remains hidden. You know, you wouldn't want a bunch of unlicensed scabs working on a literal temple either. It'll only degrade what is already there to be potentially improved upon. Although a man is born with two eyes, he does not clearly see the harmony of this great plan until suffering long years of sorrow and often solitude. Carl is quoted as saying, "Nothing whatsoever comes to consciousness without pain. Pain is a cornerstone of evolution and improvement. And as grim as it sounds, evolution can be accelerated by way of intensifying the ordeal of suffering, thus shortening the amount of time needed to grow the very eyes that can see clearly." Manly P. Hall wrote, "We have no rights to ask for wisdom." And indeed, there was nobody at the starting line saying that we deserve to have insight right out the gate. And frankly, by what authority do we demand happiness as human individuals? Wisdom and happiness is by no means the birthright of any creature. Yet, any creature may have just that, if they cultivate those attributes within themselves. In a way, People who demand happiness without doing the work are further feeding that already imbalanced dance by way of lethargy. This is like your teenage daughter who drinks from the Brita filter without refilling it, but way less tragic. And Papa P puts it even more frankly when he writes, "There is no need of asking, nor does any deity bow down to give man these things that he desires. Man is given by nature a gift, and that gift is the privilege of labor. Through labor he learns all things." But what more can any creature of earth ask than to have the opportunity to prove the existence of what he is internally, to live by the vision that leads him? If you think about it, a lifetime is simply an appointment set up before you were born that is dedicated to this potential accomplishment. But the physical world is often so overwhelming that we tend to forget that it is a thin veil that blocks the much bigger expanse of reality where our true higher selves reside. We come here to experience ignorance and a disconnect from source, and in that very lifetime, we are challenged with choosing wisdom over superstition. Superstition opposes all things and clings to the notion of falling from grace. It is a victim mentality, while wisdom seeks a deeper understanding, thus flows with all things. Wisdom celebrates the beauty of the great mystery that is hidden behind that thin veil of physical reality, experiencing it for everything it is worth until the time is right to leave it behind. Superstition wants to cling to that strand of hair that will take you down into the depths of the ocean with its own sinking ship. With wisdom, a man knows that the great unseen world known as the ether or monad, the Tao, waters of the deep, unified field, or whatever you want to call it, is what gave birth to this physical reality called Maya or illusion. To oversimplify it, the world that Sonic the Hedgehog experiences is real to him, but an illusion nonetheless. The solid ground that he runs his little ass on is birthed from the code stored on that hard drive. Sonic can't see the hard drive any more than we can see the unified field, but he can see you whenever you don't move him for several minutes, and he is very impatient, so you need to get him scooting along again. That reminds me, I haven't fed my Tamagotchi in 17 years. Spirit creates the trail, and physical matter follows swiftly behind. So in this way, truth leads and ignorance follows, so close behind that it is damn near attached to it. We are all on this trail's path and moving from ignorance to truth. Thus, getting from matter to spirit is simply an act of acceleration. And just like any thorough hike on a literal trail, accelerating to catch up is simply a matter of exertion with a purpose. You can stand there in ignorance and wonder how you're going to catch up, or you can just start walking. There are ditches in the path, tree branches smacking you in the face, and poisonous leaves, all kinds of other obstacles. But through that toil and your acceleration, you will eventually find yourself parallel to that which is actually cutting the trail. And at which point, it certainly does not get any easier, but at least you are now leading the way. Old Fred Nietzsche said that he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. Having a purpose not only makes life worth living, but also makes suffering much easier. Purpose can keep a person from cracking under the pressures of anxiety and heartache. And you don't have to travel very far to find that purpose. This is where people tend to get confused, I think, thinking that they need a big, grandiose end goal for a sense of purpose. This is nonsense, and it'll have you running in tight circles. In the case of anxiety and heartache, for example, the purpose that you now have is simply to feel all that shit for everything that it's teaching you. And that's it. Stop looking further and let that classroom take you into the next one by way of graduation. Just like lifting weights strengthens the arms, anxiety and heartache strengthen the psyche. Simply knowing that gives you a short sense of purpose to keep you from breaking down. We get to know and better acquaint ourselves with the negative to better attract the positive. Like a magnet, those opposites attract when unified. Who's gonna carry the boats? What was that supposed to be? That's a David Goggins joke. I know it. I need to make my notes less fake. Of the mystery schools is not something we can quantify in hundreds or even thousands of years. Its origin is not of this world. In esoteric thinking, the mystery schools are brought to this world by groups of celestial intelligences that govern the creative process in all the cosmos. It is here to help mankind reconnect with that cosmic source while we are cast out in this sort of experimental laboratory that is the world. It can be very disheartening to think of our world as a cosmic experiment until you realize that you are the one conducting the experiment, both scientist and lab rat all at once. The initiated understand that, just like symbols, the trials and rituals imposed onto the candidate are only blinds fabricated by the wisest ancient masters to perpetrate ideals that are currently incomprehensible to the masses who are unwilling to bend over backwards for Gnosis. And unwilling, if you ask me, is a lot worse than unknowing. The pre-initiate seeks to lift himself up from the lower realms by the very same friction that comes with it. As counterintuitive as it may seem, this is a form of Wu Wei, or effortless living, going downstream with the direction of the water that flows. The spirit is forced to agonize in the concrete world with a mind that is incomprehensible to those dwelling in the same exoteric world. But this is where mankind begins to comprehend the meaning of the allegories and the treacherous path of tribulation that comes with that very concrete. Reaching enlightenment through way of suffering is not a new idea, and it seems that the more ancient the practice, the more brutal. The most extreme cases I have seen are the ways of the Agora tribes. These people endure practices that are incomprehensible to us: self-mutilation, bloodletting, starvation, sleep deprivation, overexertion through dance and chanting, damn near to the point of death, and so on. Extremely difficult practices of which are used as tools to accelerate the spiritual evolution within. However, it should be noted that these people are deep within their culture, super hardcore, and contacting them to learn about these things is extremely dangerous, as many reporters have unfortunately come to find. But they are a real case of a still existing reflection of a time when enlightenment was no light matter. And that makes me wonder what exactly was happening just beneath the ground in the seemingly once treacherous labyrinth that we call Göbekli Tepe. Being that it is decorated with dangerous predators in stone and adorned with phallic symbols, a very masculine theme that seems to hint at a much more extreme form of hazing. Göbekli Tepe is in fact even older than the site of Giza, so this could quite possibly be the oldest known site of initiation into the mystery schools through the conquering of fear and danger. The phallic symbols suggest that this was a ritualistic path into manhood, from boy to warrior, or from adept to initiate, a course of gaining immortality by way of first-hand experience with fear and pain. And I wouldn't be surprised if this purposeful run-in with fear was exaggerated by some kind of hallucinogenic brew to amplify the darkness of the experience that much more. And of course, to thin the veil between the potential initiate and the causal realms. Taking acid or something like that under conditions that are less than pleasant, it becomes a complete nightmare. But more on Göbekli Tepe is coming up in next week's video. So mark your calendar, phone deal thingy. Within the Masonic rites, a Mason is not appointed, but instead evolved. The position he holds in the lodge means very little in comparison to his position in the greater spiritual hierarchy that is his character. And surely the Lodge of the Freemason is the very result of this long existing school of initiation. It is a reflection of ancient times where many years of preparation are necessary before entering one foot into the mysteries. This extreme difficulty is a surefire way to make sure that the shallow and faint of heart who give in willingly to temptation would be eliminated from gaining unearned wisdom. Because there's no need for an authority figure to kick somebody out when the process itself is so long and hard. Like the pillars of Göbekli Tepe, if you catch my drift. So the neophyte eliminates himself from the game if he is not ready and willing. After all, there is no one as blind as a person who is unwilling to see. To elaborate on what was said a moment ago, unwilling is worse than unable. Because unable can be worked on and slowly mastered, whereas unwilling is to wear ignorance proudly as a garment. As the neophyte approaches the position of priest king, he will see things that he has never seen before. Not because they weren't there in the first place, but because he was once blind to them. This ain't much different than when you buy a new car and now you see that same car more frequently on the road. You just put that foot in the door and now your attention is better tuned to notice that kind of car. And so the difficult process of initiation is in this way similar to Plato's cave allegory. When they walk out of the cave, they can see for the first time the very things that were casting the shadows on the wall that they thought were reality. But now that their eyes are opened outside of the cave, the sun is now blinding them with light that hurts their fresh eyes. Many people cave in to temptation of going back into the shadows where it is thought to be safe. But the student of the mysteries will endure the pain of the blinding sunlight, knowing that he can adapt and adjust to it. He trusts that process within himself. Freedom cannot be attained by a person who does not know that they're a prisoner. Again, here we are acquainting ourselves with the bad to better attract the good. And the good will frighten us before it pleases us. The axiom, the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off, comes to mind. An allegory parallel to the Masons, we are all building something. Enduring the pain that comes with the light gives us the wisdom to build the walls of the temple, walls that expand higher and further outwardly with the consciousness that is growing and building it. However, the profane, living in ignorance, are building the walls of their own prison around themselves, brick by brick, into smaller and smaller cubicles. And yes, a triple pun is intended by using the word cubicle. When building in the dark, we have to keep everything close to be able to see it. And so the world gets smaller and smaller the more you build while in that frame of mind. I think that there is a reason that office cubicles are designed that way. It limits your perception down to what is right in front of you. So what do the people do? They put up pictures of their family and a calendar with a picture of a mountain during sunset to kind of simulate the image of the life that they're missing out on from outside of that box. This is where the necktie comes in handy to be used the moment that you realize this soul trap. Does everybody get it? Who's gonna get it? Yeah. Okay, moving on. All human vehicles are born with superpowers by the very hermetic law of cause and effect. We can grab the reins of outcome and control our own destiny by using our emotions as fuel. We learned from Bentov that emotions are unique to this physical realm, a blessing and a curse indeed, depending on how we aim those emotions. Manly P. Hall sums it up this way: how can emotion manifest save through form? form. How can mind manifest until the intricately evolved brain cells of matter have raised their organic quality to form the groundwork upon which other things may be based? All students of human nature realize that every expression of man depends upon organic quality, that in every living thing this differs, and the fineness of this matter is the certain indication of growth, mental, physical, or spiritual. True to the doctrines of his craft, the entered apprentice must beautify his temple. He must build within himself by his actions, by the power of his hand, and the tools of his craft, certain qualities which make possible his initiation into the higher degrees of the spiritual lodge. We know that the cube block is symbolic of the tomb. It is also well known that the entered apprentice is incapable of rolling away the stone, of transmuting it into a greater or higher thing. But it is his privilege to purify and glorify that stone and begin the great work of preparing it for the temple of his king. And I love the way that is a metaphor for you can't roll the stone. It's a block, it's a cube, it's a square, but you can decorate it, so to speak, like the dung beetle, you can polish a turd. Few realize that since the universe is made up of individuals in various stages of development, responsibility is consequently individual, and everything which man wishes to gain, he must himself build and maintain. If he is to use his finer bodies for the purpose for which they were intended, he must treat them well, that they may be good and faithful servants in the great work that he is preparing for. And it is no secret that the mind and the body are deeply connected and affect each other constantly. If you want to improve the mind, improve the body, and vice versa. After all, the atomic body is a temporary vehicle for the spirit, and just like any vehicle, like a car, it has to be maintained according to its own specific nature. In the book Lost Keys of Freemasonry, Papa P breaks down 5 particular steps that he considers to be foundation requirements of anyone who might feel urged to correlate himself with the great work of the mystics. 1. The entered apprentice should have studied sufficiently the subject of anatomy to have at least a general idea of the physical body. The human body is the highest manifestation of form which he is capable of analyzing. 2. The entered apprentice must realize that his body is the living temple of the living God and treat it accordingly. For when he abuses or mistreats it, he breaks the sacred obligations which he must assume before he can ever hope to understand the true mysteries of the craft. The breaking of his pact within the higher life evolving within himself unfailingly invokes the retributive agencies of nature. 3. He must study the problem of maintenance through food, clothing, breathing, and other necessities. Those who eat immoderately, dress improperly, and use only about 1/3 of their lung capacity can never have the physical efficiency necessary for the fullest expression of the higher life. So basically no fun allowed there. 4. Human relationships must be idealized at this time, and he must seek to unfold all unselfish qualities which are necessary for the harmonious working of the Mason and his fellow men on the physical plane of nature. 5. He must seek to round off all inequalities. He can best do this by balancing his mental and physical organisms through the application and study of the 7 liberal arts and sciences, and for those 7 steps, see our last video called Stairway to Certitude. And we can probably shorten that up just by saying to do yoga and don't forget to breathe. Breathing, turns out, you gotta do pretty much all of the time. What a pain in the ass. And by utilizing more than 1/3 of your lung capacity, I don't think Manly P. Hall is referring to your bong rips. So put it down, Sean. Hall insists that life manifests through human emotion just as much as through physical action. These emotional powers need to be kept in check, like the horses pulling the chariot mentioned in the allegory of the Bhagavad Gita. In the tangible realm, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The exact notion is true for the emotional state of the psyche. It has a direct and immediate reflection into our outer reality. If you can learn to pick and choose your own emotions, then likewise you get to pick and choose your own fate in this world. This works in reverse, by the way, due to what we are finding out about retrocausality in physics. But that's for another video.
What time is it?
It is 12:58, aka 1 o'clock. What's up?
I've been gaming for like an hour.
I know.
No, like 5 hours actually.
You've been deep into it. Why don't you go outside for a little bit?
No. I'm just getting up so I can have my bones not hurting as much.
We have like 70,000 subscribers, and your hair looks like this, and you're just gonna pop on the screen and not worry about what this looks like?
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right. Do you want to read the next part?
No. What? Can you guys hear this?
Microphone. Are you cracking and popping? Oh, that's gross. Get no, get out of here. No.
What?
It's just funny because we just got talking about treating your body like a temple and all this, and you come up and you start breaking your own bones in front of me. How are you doing that? Show me double joints. Look on the camera. Yeah.
I'm double jointed in my shoulders a bit too. That's why I make this noise.
Yeah. Get out of here. Get out of here.
I know what I mean. Dad.
Go outside. Look at the grass. Go get a friend. Go.
I'm gaming. I'm just in a scene. I'm getting back.
And another axiom comes to mind. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at start to change. This is emotional alchemy cut and drive. This is emotional alchemy cut and dry. And so Mr. Hall drops us 5 more steps that are this time concerned more with the psyche. 1. The mastery of emotional outbreaks of all kinds, poise under trying conditions, and kindness in the face of unkindness, and simplicity with its accompanying power. These points show that the seeker is worthy of being taught. 2. The mastery of the animal energies, the curbing of passion and desire, and the control of the lower nature mark the faithful attempts on the part of the student. 3. The understanding and mastery of the creative forces, the consecration of them to the unfolding of the spiritual nature, and a proper understanding of their physical application. 4. The transmutation of personal affection into impersonal compassion. This shows that the fellow craftsman truly understands his duties and is living in a manner worthy of his order. Personalities cannot bind the true member. For having raised 1 point of the compass, he now realizes that all personal manifestations are governed by impersonal principles. And again, for that compass metaphor, watch the most recent video. 5. The candidate consecrates the 5 senses to the study of human problems with the unfolding of sense centers as the motive, for he realizes that the 5 senses are keys, the proper application of which will give him material for spiritual transmutation, if he will apply them to the common divisor of analogy. So basically, we embody the mind that connects heaven and earth together in this endless chain, above and below. The spiritual light is brighter if we evolve higher the personal vehicle of the soul, which is mind and body coherence. The alchemical sun and moon are united in this hermetic degree. The psyche can be lifted and liberated from its symbolic cube. So, what happened when the aspirant was locked away in the darkness to experience fear? Let's take a step back in time and let's once again pay a visit to ancient Egypt. Of all the ancient peoples, the old school Egyptians were the most advanced in the occult sciences. Only the wisest of philosophers would travel across the globe to be initiated into the Great Mystery School. How do you say it? Thales?
Say it again to me. I might not have heard you actually.
Thales. Sometimes I'll just pronounce it wrong because it makes people comment.
Do that.
But
I can't get my mouth.
Thales, Solon, Pythagoras, and Plato all traveled to the delta of the Nile seeking this Gnosis. What happened within remains up for debate, but we have a solid source of information by the name of the late Manly P. Hall. Through those passageways lies the path that leads to the eye of judgment and the feet of Amun-Ra. Go, and if thy heart be pure as the garment that you wear, and if thy motive be unselfish, thy feet shall not stumble, and thy being shall be filled with light. But remember that Typhon and his host of death lurk in every shadow, and that death is the result of failure. A side note, Typhon is the desire of the few pitted against the good of the many. He is the spirit of dissension and discord that breaks up unity of purpose by setting factions against each other, divide and conquer. The desire for riches, power, and sovereignty by which this evil genius was obsessed reveals the temptation by which humanity is deflected from the ultimate goal and led into the byways of sorrow and despair. As the murderers of the master builder, they are ignorance, superstition, and fear, the destroyer of all good things. So moving on with the story here. The shadows of the great unknown closed over him who had dedicated his life to the search of the eternal. The priest watched him until he was lost to sight among the massive pillars beyond the silent span that divided the living from the dead. Through years of purification, he had prepared himself for the great ordeal. With a purified body and balanced mind, he went his way in and out among the pillars that loomed about him. He seemed a ghostly form amid a grove of ancient trees. He passed steadily on his way with but one thought in mind: let there be light. Ghastly music grew louder and louder, terminating at last in a mighty roar. The very walls shook, the dancing forms swayed like flickering candles. Before him loomed another doorway, flanked on either side by an obelisk of carved marble, one black and the other white. There materialized upon the ground at his feet a swirl of lurid mist. In the faint glow that it cast, it twisted like some oily gas. Then out of this cloud issued a gigantic form, half human, half reptile. In its bloodshot eyes burned ruddy pools of demon fire, while white clawed hands reached out to enfold and crush the slender figure that confronted it. Aradamus wavered for a single instant as the horrible apparition lunged forward, its size doubly magnified in the iridescent fog. Then the white-robed neophyte again slowly advanced. He raised his face and courageously faced the hideous specter. As he confronted the menacing form, for an instant it loomed over him like a towering demon. Aradamus raised the cross he carried and held it up before the monster. The crux anasta gleamed with a wondrous golden light, which, striking the oily, scaly monster, seemed to dissolve its every particle into golden sparks. Bearing his cross, Aradamus entered the room and gazed upward at the lofty dome. There, floating in space far above his head, he saw a great closed eye, surrounded by fleecy clouds and rainbow colors. Long Aradamus gazed upon the wondering sight, for he knew it was the eye of Horus, the all-seeing eye of the gods. As he stood, he prayed that the will of the gods might be made known to him, and that in some way he might be found worthy to open that closed eye in the temple of the living God. The eyelid flickered. As the great orb slowly opened, the chamber was filled with dazzling, blinding light that seemed to consume the very stones with fire. Aradamus staggered. It seemed as if every atom of his being was scorched by the effulgence of that glow. He closed his eyes and now feared to open them, for in that terrific blaze of splendor, it seemed that only blindness would follow. But then a strange feeling of peace and calm descended upon him, and he dared to open his eyes to find that the glare was gone. The entire chamber was bathed in a soft, wondrous glow from the almighty eye in the ceiling. As his eyes became accustomed to the glow, he saw that he was no longer alone. He was surrounded by 12 white-robed figures who, bowing before him, held up strange insignia wrought from living gold. All the figures pointed, and as he followed the direction of their hands, he saw a staircase of living light that led far up into the dome and past the eye in the ceiling. With one voice, the 12 said, "Yonder lies the way of liberation." Yonder. With feet that seemed to barely touch the steps, he climbed upward into the dawn of the great unknown. After climbing many steps, he reached a doorway that opened as he neared it. The breath of morning air fanned his cheek, and a golden ray of sun played among the waves of his dark hair. This turned into a romance novel real quick. Surprised, he then stood at the top of the mighty pyramid. Before him, a blazing altar. In the distance, far over the horizon, the rolling sands of the Egyptian desert reflected the first rays of the morning sun. Like a globe of golden fire, rose again out of the eternal east. As Eridamus stood there, a voice that seemed to issue from the very heavens chanted a strange song, and a hand, reaching out as if it were from the globe of day itself, placed a serpent wrought of gold upon the brow of the new initiate. Behold Khepera, the rising sun, for he brings the mighty globe of day out of darkness of night between his claws. So for thee, the Son of Spirit has risen from the darkness of night, and in the name of the living God, we hail thee, priest of Ra. Okay, I want to know what was in that brew. So, ancient hierophants, who it is said that death had forgotten, royal priests who were born from one age to another age without dying. It was said that Melchizedek was his own father and mother, and that Jesus was of the same order. These immortals were parallel to the symbol of the phoenix of the lesser understood Masonic emblem. The axiom, "He has come forth by day," parallels the life of Enoch, once he was liberated from his darkest portions and left the world without tasting the bitterness of death. The legendary and wise Plato suggested that the body is a sepulchre of the soul, and the soul within awaits liberation one way or another, and well, one of two ways. The ignorant are liberated through necessity, but the wise through choice. When you are faced with two paths, choose the path that is hard. Choose the path that is dark. Choose the path with the brambles in your way. Because if you aren't busy clearing obstacles in your path, then you must be following someone else's.
Giving into it is feeding into it, buried into my own head in here, finding rest in it, seeing circles and squares, and looking into it like it is. We'll walk up to the end, dive into the abyss, fly away as if there's no bottom or top. Lean into it and embrace the ladder between the pillars that don't stand alone or end. Dust in our eyes until the fall. Catch wind of the light of insight, unbind you. The will pines, we go blind. Did you forget that death comes to save you? One open eye can see at night. Open the space above guts and skin blue. Out of the line until I die. So give in polite to the test that finds you. Give in polite to the test that finds you. Give in polite to the test that finds you. To you I fall together, all to meet again. Your wasted life was on time, no life wasted. You're on time. Welcome to the end. Dive into the abyss. Fly away as if there's no bottom or top. Dust in our eyes until the fall. Catch wind of the light of insight, unbind you. The will pines, we go blind. Did you forget that death comes to save you? One open eye and can't see at night. Open the space above guts and skin blue. Out of the line until I die. So give in polite to the test that finds you. Give in polite to the test that finds you. Give in polite to the test that finds you. To you I fall together, all to meet again. Your wasted life. Welcome to the end. I'm diving to the end.
Western mysticism and Eastern Zen, there is a common trunk between the two. The master does not tell you anything is real. He is not out to convince. He simply becomes his philosophy, and thus is proof in himself. This is the essence of the Philosopher's Stone. If you imagine a utopia, it goes without saying that everyone would have to be cool. It is the wild cards out here that give the government an excuse to run rampant with their own crimes. But hypothetically, if every person was to give as much as they take and not conspire to benefit from the loss of others, the notion is feasible. Imagine now wanting to get into utopia. You would not necessarily have to pass a test as much as understand its meaning. A test can be forgotten and answers gone back on. You've seen elections, and even then, tests are subjective to representing a frozen moment of time in a perpetually changing world. There must be a deeper way of knowing that the wisdom of a person is to the point that everywhere he goes, he leaves that place a little bit better than it was before. This level of consciousness is not easy to come by or attain. The person must understand the hidden element of their subconscious mind that often does wrong while the ego remains blind to it. We have seen how selfish desire can be disguised as virtue, even to the very person in question. Becoming to this point means facing that dark spot of the psyche head on and getting your own hands dirty in the process. It means diving into the dumpster part of the mind and getting to know every portion that you hide from yourself. Some would rather die, and indeed, this is a form of death and rebirth. Once we identify these excess parts of the psyche, only then are they ready to burn away in alchemical fire. Once this death is conquered, you are tempered in the very ever-changing meaning around you, your will and desire being focused on the betterment of the overall world and not accompanied by the aim of how you see fit. You now enter utopia without a need for that prior inquisition, as you now radiate absolute certitude. Oversimplified as this is, it is the essence of the initiate. Once this has been mastered, beings of the higher and more subtle realms will take notice and begin to adopt you as their peer. Again, oversimplified, but this is the intro. Like Thoth and many like him, you are now considered the spaceborne initiate. The you has now died before any kind of physical death. You beat death at its own game, and now when physical death comes knocking, it has nothing to take home. Like the predators of primordial man and the archons of modern man, even death does not dare lay his hands on the flame. Society patterns our lives. We are in a web of dependence on everything around us, both puppet and puppeteer dancing. We feel like we can't become certain things without risking our paychecks, relationships, or reputation, or whatever. The things we want to do has a myriad of attachments tied to it, so even seeing it clearly is difficult. When that web of attachments disappears, it seems like a catastrophe. It's not. And you can thank yourself, that is, your subconscious or higher self, whatever your favorite mouth noise for it is, because it found a way to burn off the residual substance from your core of purpose. The external world was creating patterns for you to follow that went against the grain of your real potential. When you can no longer depend on anyone but yourself, you are liberated, because now it doesn't matter if you fail or succeed, as long as you are that core that can't be tampered with. A pure substance like gold is something that cannot be added to or improved. When alchemical fire burns off additional elements that pollute a pure substance, it stands alone in its own value. Throwing Gucci on it only hides its brilliance and distracts from its realness. This is the same as a person's character. We burn off external distractions that might have us wavering in one direction or the other, away from our personal course of direction. And in a way, any conscious man is an alchemist once he understands that experiences are the chemicals of life with which the philosopher experiments. The world is his laboratory. Initiates of the Flame, Manly P. Hall's first book, 1922, comes out swinging right away in the preface. The initiates who took their oaths in the presence of the flame renounced the lesser concerns of ordinary life, and freed from the attachments of this material sphere, these purified souls become custodians of that symbolic flame of wisdom, which is the true light of the world. Manly P. Hall's philosophy was symbolical. He understood that our lives were a mirror of a deeper cosmic order, that we are extensions of an original source, a source that we can get closer to in phases of initiation. In a few of his books, he has stressed the importance that a person can very well be self-initiated, and that the temples, badges, and degrees and whatnot might be suiting for this art form, but altogether unnecessary. And to be frank, some of the most intelligent people I know would prefer a form of Gnosis without the banana stickers attached. So, speaking of which, we can't rightly cover this subject without getting a misconception out of the way. Hall was a 33rd degree Freemason, and thus, according to conspiracy, Illuminati or whatever. This is nonsense to its core. But now hold on. Before you shout at me in the comments and boost my algorithm that way, I am not saying that the Masons have gone without corruption. Has there been groups working in the shadows that have infiltrated the Masonic lodges in order to gain a form of wisdom to be used as a tool in their own selfish endeavors? Sure, but I don't have a dog in that race on the subject and would rather give my attention to the cornerstone of learning here. I feel like selfish use of Masonic wisdom is an oxymoron anyway, and will implode on itself in its own time. Evil self-destructs because all it knows is destruction. So despite the rise and fall of nations and the corrupted rat race of society, there are those who see through the smog of materiality. This is especially difficult now, though, given the direction that most forms of media have taken on. Because, well, the direction it has taken on is specifically meant to fill your eyes with its fog. Degeneracy, lust, hate, and fear has crept into the hive mind of man and crippled it by way of black magic of the media, causing this inner flame in each of us to be buried in its own spiritual ashes. Those ignited by this flame are called pagan heathens by the church, called conspiracy theorists by the news, and called ADD and many other things by the schooling systems. This is certainly enough to make the potential in someone shy away. But it's not enough to make the flame die. In fact, it cannot die. As long as there is consciousness, it is there waiting to be fueled again. Whether you know it or not, the moments that you have chosen self-sacrifice for the betterment of others, you have fueled this very flame. After all, the flame emits light, and just like any flame, it does not have a preference as to what it illuminates. The flame in us honors Christ, but it also honors Orpheus, Hermes, Krishna, the Buddha. Let's see here, Muhammad, Zoroaster, Confucius, Odin. My apologies if I missed your favorite, but the point is that the flame does not pick a favorite and then choose to preach it. It simply illuminates where it is fueled. That flame is God, whatever it is you choose that to be personified as, and people are the sparks flinging off of that flame. As you can imagine, the further a spark travels from the flame, the dimmer it gets. Paul speaks of the cube altar that the flame sets on when it burns its sacrifice. The sacrifice might be a bull or a ram, causing many to wonder why there is so much animal violence in the Bible. It should be made clear, though, that the cube represents the man himself, and the animal sacrifice is that of a celestial zodiac that represents the lower nature of man. Animalistic desires within himself. Another bit of symbolism is the spade. This is often shown with a coffin or an open grave with a sprig of acacia strain laying with it. This is representing mortality due to its usefulness in digging into the ground as a shovel. The coffin and the grave, of course, go without saying, but that sprig of acacia might be interesting to some of you who have seen our prior videos. But it's not all doom and gloom with the spade, as it is also used to bury our darker passions and distracting emotions. It's also not all gardening tools over here either. You'll notice that with the rod attached to it, like a shovel, it seems to resemble something else. The spade is the sacrum bone that fuels the fire of the spinal column, thus making it a symbol of passion and the arts. Like roots, we have the spinal nerves that transit the backbone, creating the tree of life, the center of which nourishes all created things. The creative energy that flows upward from the roots or the sacrum and fuel the altar flame at the top of the spine, where ideas are born, solutions and creativity are born. This is a two-way street, you see. The head doesn't have its power without the fuel from the sacrum, and the sacrum doesn't function without the information from the head. And what is important here is it is very simply the focusing of particular thoughts in this higher realm, the head, that aims the sacred energy of the lower flame, and when both are fully gassed up, the unit together becomes an unstoppable force. Go ahead and enter your no-fap jokes in the comments here. But nonetheless, the greater the fuel, the more powerful the flame. The darkness of the unknown can only be removed by light. The greater the light, the further back the darkness is repelled. And with this, we have the symbol of the philosopher or hermit carrying his lamp, where he can walk on uneven surfaces and along narrow cliff edges without fear. These obstacles, of course, symbolize the rat race that we are submersed in and the lower emotions within himself. He understands the promise of life and immortality as residing within him, represented by that sprig of an acacia strain, of which, again, the acacia strain is not necessarily completely symbolic, if you know what I'm saying. Google it. Mythologies and religions tend to have sacred places, oftentimes a mountain. Valhalla, Asgard, Mount Olympus, Mount Salvart of the Holy Grail mythology, Mount Sinai, and so on. Hall finds this to be very heavily symbolic as well. When the spinal fire of man starts upward in its wanderings, it stops at many shrines and visits many holy places. For like the Masonic brother and his Jacob's ladder, the way that leads to heaven is upward and inward. The spinal fire goes through the centers or seed ground of many great principles. Only after pain and suffering and long labor does it cross the waste of sand, and before him, in the heart of the lotus, rises the golden city, Shambala. In the spreading of the bone between the eyes, called the frontal sinus, is the seat of the divine in man. There in a peculiar, it's like, I've never been able to nail that one. Peculiar, unfamiliar gaseous material. Let me just go ahead and kick that right back off here. There, in an unfamiliar gaseous material, floats, or rather exists, the fine essence which we know as the spirit. This is the lost city in the sacred desert, connected to the lower world by the rainbow bridge or silver cord. And it is to this point in himself that the student is striving to rise. This is the sacred pilgrimage of the soul, in which the individual leaves the lower man and the world below and climbs upward into the higher man or higher world, the brain. This is the great pilgrimage to Shambala. And as the great city is the center for the direction of our earth, so the corresponding great city in man is the center of his governmental system. When any other principle governs man, he is not attuned to his own higher self. Let the seeker remember that all of these things must first happen within himself before he can find himself in the universe without. The 12 elder brothers within himself must first be reached and understood before those of the universe can be comprehended. If he would see that sacred city in the lotus blossom, he must first open that lotus within himself, which he does petal by petal when he purifies and attunes himself to the higher principles within. So P. Hall has got quite a way of just wrapping up just about everything within very few words. Kind of makes me feel like a baby. But that last portion there reminds me of the absurdity discussed in our prior series on beings from outer worlds, and how it is utter confusion and sometimes terror to average human beings who encounter these higher energies without having found a concrete foundation within themselves to be able to comprehend such abstraction. Also noted here is the lotus, which we have covered many times, that rings the phrase "no mud, no lotus," being that the roots of the lotus are very deep in materiality, while the petals are able to rise up and experience the immortality of sunshine because of its stability from the roots. Which goes to show you that we cannot attain a spiritual life by simply shedding all material endeavors. There is a yin and yang here, and we can't have one without the other. This is a cooperative system and not a competitive one. The mountain is high because the valley is low. I have seen so many people who failed in their spiritual quest because they want to drop everything in the physical world or just anything that they find to be unpleasant. They forget to keep their roots seated in what is real, Maya, because, well, it turns out we live in the physically real. 1 foot in the grave, babe. Eons of amnesia have come and gone since the heights of the Egyptian priest kings. Egypt was once considered the land of great truths and in many ways the cradle of initiation. Pharaoh is the Egyptian word for king, but make no mistake, due to the subtle power of Kundalini energy, they were considered demigods with 1 foot on earth and the other in heaven. A degeneration took place throughout the ages of Egypt, possibly due to the link between our collective hive mind and the ages of the Kali Yuga cycles. As the earth went through its cyclical changes, so did we. But mythology and religions can agree with mathematical science in one regard, that Egypt was once the epitome of Gnosis concerning the joint relationship between spirit and man, whatever it is they consider spirit to be. Try to picture for a moment the Great Hall of Luxor, its inscriptive columns holding up domes of solid granite, each column carved with the histories of the gods. There, at the upper end of the chamber, sat the pharaoh of the Nile in his robes of state. Around him, his counselors, chief among them the priests of the temple. An imposing spectacle it surely was. The gigantic frame of the later Atlantean, robed in gold and priceless jewels. On his forehead, the coiled serpent of the initiate, the serpent which was raised in the wilderness, that sleeping serpent's power in man, whose coiled head downward around the tree of life drove him from the garden of the Lord, but which raised upon the cross became the symbol of the Christ. The encircled serpent is the crown of the ancient gods. It shows that the two paths or parts of the spirit fire have been united. This crown is the symbol of mastery, and the union takes place within the serpent when the life forces are lifted to the brain. The serpent working upward in the regenerated individual is called the Kundalini. This serpent was the sign that within him the serpent had been raised, for for the true pharaoh was a priest of God, as well as a master of men. There he sat upon the cube altar throne, indicating his mastery over the four elements of his physical body, who, in spite of all his power and glory, still bowed in humble supplication to the will of the gods. In his hands he carries the triple scepter of the Nile, the shepherd's crook, and the anubis-headed staff, and the flail or whip. These were the symbols of his work. They represent the powers which he had mastered. With the whip, he had subjugated his physical body. With the shepherd's hook, he was the guardian and keeper of his emotional body. With the anubis-headed staff, he was the master of his mind and worthy to wield the powers of government over others because, first of all, he obeyed the laws himself. A wise king of a wise people, and it was through these priest kings that the divine worked, for they were of the order of Melchizedek. Through them was formed that doctrine which degeneracy has not been able to entirely obliterate. They were conscious instruments in the hands of a ready writer, willing and proud to do the work of those with whom, through knowledge and truth, they had attuned themselves. But the time came, as in all nations, when selfishness and egotism entered the heart of the king and people alike, and slowly the hand from the great white brotherhood that fed ancient Egypt was withdrawn, and the powers of darkness transformed the land of glory into one of ruins, and the names of the mighty kings were buried beneath the oblivion of degeneracy. The great temples of the pharaohs are ruins, and the temples of Isis are but broken heaps of sandstone. But what of the priest kings who labored there in the days of its glory? Well, their flame is still with us in Gnosis. They have continued to walk the path. Although his scepter is gone and his priestly vestments have molded away, the priest king still walks the earth with the dignity and the power and the childish simplicity that before made him great. He no longer wears the robes of his order. Although he bears no credentials, he is as much a priest king now as then, for he still bears the true insignia of his rank. The hand that bestowed the riches of the past does little acts of kindness now. Although he no longer carries the scepters of self-mastery, still he manifests that mastery in his daily life. Although the altar fires within the temple of Karnak have long been dead, the true fire within himself still burns, and before that he still bows as he once bowed in the days of Egypt's glory. If you have ever immediately liked someone despite their humble appearance, and likewise disliked someone despite a plethora of charm, or if you have ever seen intelligent people who were downright fools, and likewise people who knew very little but were somehow very wise, those are likened to the insignia of ancient rank. It is a hierarchy that no loss of title or position can destroy. These humble and wise men are kings without crowns. Quite the opposite of our modern day puppets dressed in fine suits and ties. The old ones are still kings and will be as long as they bow to that greater good before them. The crown might be replaced with thorns, but the fire continues to burn. Paul insists throughout Initiates of the Flame that every sacred thing outside of man represents some organ or function within himself. This goes all the way back to the pyramid, and you know which one I'm talking about, as Hall has insisted that the Great Pyramid is the OG. At first, I wondered if he was aware of the Bosnian Pyramid, and probably not, but it seems that age and size is not what makes the Great Pyramid of Giza so special. We have covered on this channel before the mathematics of the pyramids, and when we add Hall's take here, it adds a symbolic notion, and this tells me that the purpose of the Great Pyramid is threefold. Mathematically, it illustrates our place in the solar system, the Earth and the Sun-Moon relationship. Again, something we've covered. Architecturally, it was used as a power plant, utilizing harmonic cymatics. What it was used to power, though, we have no idea, but hopefully some new theories will come through, enough to make a full video on that in the future. But even then, I hesitate to make that video, considering that Y-Files pretty much knocked it out of the park on that one. So, I mean, hit me up in the comments if you have an idea as to what this clean energy was used for. And then third, we have the symbolic representation put together by Hall. The four-sided base of the pyramid represents the four elements in which man's bodies are composed: hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon. Once upon a time, though, this may have been considered water, air, fire, and earth, the latter set of which is likened to the body, as the physical body is raised from the earth, the vital body from water, the emotional body from fire, and the mental body from air. Adding up the sides of the triangles, we have 12, or the 12-fold constitution of man split up into the 12 zodiacal dividends. We also have the 12 cranial nerves, and the list of things that are tuned to the counting system of 12 could go on and on at this point, but Hall mentioned that absolutely no royalty was ever buried within the pyramid, which, yes, I realize we already know, but considering this book came out in 1922, he was certainly ahead of his time on that notion. Well, not notion, but on that lie, as we seem to continue finding out more and more that the tomb hypothesis seems to be less of a mistake and more of a cover-up to throw off the magnitude of this immortal work. Speaking of which, can we stop calling it the King's and Queen's Chambers? This is like continuing to call Native Americans Indians long after finding out that they are not that. There is something silly about the human dialect. When we call something a word or a name and it sticks, we have a really hard time updating our lingo, but the chambers do seem to be used as a coffer for initiation. Hall writes about this: the candidate was buried in the earth and resurrected, a symbol of death of the lower man and the liberation of the higher. It is said that Moses was initiated in the Great Pyramid, and some also say that Jesus was instructed there also. Be that as it may, we know that for thousands of years since the time it was built by the Atlanteans, it has been the greatest temple of initiation in the world. It seems also that its work is not yet done, for mutely it is teaching those who will see the mysteries of creation. There is probably no point that is as important in connection with the pyramid as that of the cornerstone. On the very top of the Great Pyramid is a comparatively flat space about 30 feet square. I didn't know it was that big. In other words, the true stone, which is the head of all the corners, is missing. If we look at the reverse side of the United States seal, we find again that the pyramid from which the top is separated. Omar, a great Persian poet, gives us the secret of the keystone when he says, quote, "From my base metal shall be filed a key, which shall unlock the door he howls without. Upon the cross matter that forms our bodies hangs the key to all mysteries of creation. It is our duty to take this key and with it unlock the door that conceals from us the unknown. The key is spirit." The value of the Great Pyramid is only possible when all of these elements are united into one. When all of these triangles rest on each other, they stand erect. We are all aware of the allegory of King Arthur's sword. Basically, raw strength didn't matter. Only a righteous person could pull the sword out from the stone cube. You can go ahead and twist this into a size doesn't matter, it's what you do with it type of parable, if you would like. Have fun with it. It's mythology. Make it your own. It's Plato. Written on the stone were these words, quote, "Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is rightwise king, born of England." So The stone cube represents the physical body and its sensory limitations and desires. For more on that, see the video that you've all seen. The anvil represents experience in the cold, hard world, as it is the tool used to sharpen the sword. And of course, the sword is a representation of the spirit to be freed from the limitations of man's biology, the cube. Now, the sword itself is a common theme in a lot of mythology, considering it is a weapon of righteousness. It was used to slay dragons, and of course we know that in mythology, dragons are more than just a story enhancer. They represent the reptilian nature of man, the amygdala, where our fight or flight survival mode is stuck with us. I'll stop there in this regard though. We have covered a lot of this type of mythology and what we can learn from it in some of our older videos on this channel. Feel free to throw it in reverse and check out some of those older videos. The production is not as great, but the information is solid. The antiquity of man's inner flame, the spirit fire, is currently buried beneath the ruins of man's fallen temple, obscured by a myriad of worldly interests. The flame of that candle is burnt out, but if you look close enough into communities like this one, it emits a very faint glow, like a diamond in the rough, a mythology peeking its head out of a non-philosophic age. We are what's left of that fire, and it is up to us to keep that ember glowing until a time comes that mankind as a whole is ready to warm its hands again. The divine spark is there, despite how thoroughly it's been blown out by those who consider themselves in charge of the world. That wick down the center of the candle is us. Our decisions are the oxygen that is available to reignite that flame. Our words and our actions, when leaning on each other like the walls of the pyramid, are the pneuma that will eventually supply that dim, glowing ember with the fuel it needs to catch fire again. And when that fire spreads, the darkness has no choice in the matter anymore. Because when the light comes, darkness doesn't just run. It completely ceases to exist, except as a shadow.
mindsets diverge once again. Content with life's breath, my only friend. Hyper aware, old strength doesn't wear. Companioned by the sound of the fuzz.
Many aeons before the building of Solomon's temple, life pierced the impenetrable, and the egg of void unfolded into definable negation of being. Standing at the banks of this swirling substance, there was only one witness. The lonely figure was robed in blue, a garment from which ignorance fled. His well-lit crown of gold commanded darkness's chaos to evaporate. This visitor came from a far greater reality than our own, in order to answer a call. And the call came in, speaking the words, "You are the chosen instrument of my hand, and I appoint you to be the builder of my temple. In your hands I placed the plans of living substance. I have weighed you in the balance, and you have not been found wanting. Therefore to you I give the glory of work. Hiram Abiff, chosen builder of your father's house, get up into your work. You will build without the sound of hammer, or the voice of workmen, a temple eternal in the heavens." And so Hiram straightened his shoulders, and taking the layout design board in his hands, he walked slowly into primordial dawn. Wondering how to measure units of timeless eternity in this new reality, ages passed while the lonely builder labored. Molding the darkness into form, with his bare hands he kept his eyes raised above where the great voice had spoken. In divine solitude he labored, with no voice to cheer him on, and also no spirit to condemn his work. Realizing that no single hand alone could take on this hopeless task, he fashioned three huge creatures with no soul of their own. They were called thought, emotion, and action. But almost immediately, the threesome de-evolved into perverted thought, desiring emotion, and destructive action, a possible side effect of the current reality's density. But mud sat up, and they loomed like grim specters in the now semi-dark. Turning on their maker and striking him with his own tools, they left the Grandmaster Hiram Abiff dying in the midst of his labors, unfinished. Bleeding at the foot of his work, he spoke out loud to his master that dwelled in the prior realms. Radiating forgiveness, he prayed, "My labors are not finished. Why must they always remain undone? I have not completed your task. My very creation has turned against me. The very gift of your tools have destroyed me. By hands of ignorance I have been murdered. I give you back these tools and die a faithful builder." Hiram closed his eyes, grateful for his unique experience, before a great voice roared from beyond the primordial chaos. "He is not dead. He is asleep." But who will awaken this Mason? The only company that exists are his own creations of betrayal. And so likewise, he must remain asleep until these three ruffians can resurrect the master themselves. Quite the divine irony indeed, because the very same personifications of thought, emotion, and action must now evolve from uncurbed to being shepherded into a wider sentience. Right thought, guided emotion, and correct action, the three together hold the key to the resurrection of Hiram, who is none other than you yourself. And so the three ruffians came to admit that their first action was a human weakness, but that their second would be of a sacred duty, resurrection. Unfortunately, Hiram was left with no grave marking the site of his death, so in the place of the tools used for murder, the great architect from the causal realm placed a small lantern in the hands of the three. And why not? Hiram forgave them already, and they have repented. The architect instructed them to find their master's corpse under a broken twig of acacia strain by filling the silent chaos with his thundering word. "He cometh forth as a flower and is cut down. He fleeth also as a shadow and continues not. Waters fail the sea, and so the same man lieth down and riseth not again. Behold, I have compassion upon the children of my creation. Go and seek where the broken acacia twig lies." Like strange phantoms of a dream, the three figures wandered over the great unknown, to this day seeking while carrying their tiny lamp. There is a good reason that this story ends right there, because you have to finish it. This ancient allegory takes on many forms, but each one bears the same meaning. The reader is the temple builder of the coming civilization. Frankly put, the foundation that you lay out today will be the cornerstone of your temple tomorrow. The legend parabolically insists that never before in the history of men have you had the opportunity that confronts you today. The world waits for the protagonist's illumination to ignite with humility in order to not find, but build the temple of wisdom and personally take up the slack that nobody else will in order to finish the architect's work. Before we dive in, I think it is necessary to give a solid example of how symbolism can be used to illustrate what words cannot. Viewers of this channel know that I always put symbolism up right here to complement my notes because, well, there are certain concepts that language alone cannot capture. I love Gnostic art, so this one is perfecto. At the bottom, we have the dragon, or the portion of man that requires cessation, worldly pleasures. It is hungry and burdened with bloodthirst. It has eyes all over because it must stay vigilant here in survival mode. The moon is behind it, symbolizing everything in this lower world being temporary. It comes, it wanes, and it goes. Above that is the sun, which comes and goes as well, but never wanes. It is always there and represents the prana that can always be tapped into. This is the inner flame or life force in all mankind that is so often ignored. Its home is the higher worlds or subtle realms. In front of this, we have the messenger that delivers us from the lower realms, represented by the angel. She holds wisdom that links the two worlds together and understands the necessity of both. This is your higher psyche or higher self. The baby is renewal of the spirit. Now that the suffering has been complete, the soul is birthed or delivered from darkness into light. The hands of the above gently take the child to be free from the so-called survival mode. Because although it has matured in its previous world, it is new and fragile to this new one. On either side, we have poles of opposing forces, in this case, divine, masculine, and feminine. The opposites that have to be met in order to stay the middle path, making this path straight up. But no matter how straight shot the line is, the direction is only a tool, like a compass. It doesn't go anywhere unless it first has been in the depths to sprout roots. There is simply no way for the baby to be birthed without having first experienced the two opposing forces in the lower gross realms. The dragon is embraced before it is slain. Now, what is important to remember here is that your interpretation of this plate will be different from mine. That is the point, though. And it is precisely the reason that symbolism does what words cannot. By speaking to you, my words are decoded by your own personal dictionary. Everyone's is different. Symbolism speaks directly to your subconscious mind. And unfortunately, that's why they use it in advertising to persuade you at the deepest level to make you think that you need something. But that is for a future video. Okay, so practical symbology. Symbolism is mysterious and cryptic, so a lot of fun indeed, but the mystique of its aesthetic often derails people from its purpose, which is to be used as a thought form or a mind tool in order to achieve insight or gnosis. It should be made clear, though, that no book or alchemical plate of symbols will ever cause any form of gnosis on their own. They are simply tools to guide the initiate. He's got to ignite that inner flame himself. In Masonic art, we often see the candidate ascending a collection of stairs. The 7 steps symbolize the main arts and sciences to be mastered by the candidate: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. I kind of need to see music in there. And in a way, I suppose it is the invisible geometry of passing time, whereas the visual arts are geometry frozen in time. And sometimes ancient architecture captures both in the form of cymatics, but that'll be for a future video as well. The set of 5 steps represents the 5 senses of our own biological way of experiencing the world: hearing, seeing, smelling, feeling, and tasting. Something that seems to be obvious, but again, the reason that these are steps is because each one is to be mastered. Kind of like the 12-step program that perhaps some of us should be getting to know before any of these. I'll quit it. I'm joking about myself. Relax. And finally, the set of 3 steps represents the Trinity that has been a key role in just about every religious sect ever. A whole spiel on the Trinity can be found on our video Absurdity. And man, it really is crazy just how everything esoteric seems to be linked together. But the steps as a metaphor of graduation is perfecto, because we are the vehicle used for the psyche to climb in this upward direction. A man stands with one foot in heaven and the other foot on earth. The bull and its horns are a powerful force to be tamed, the animal nature. And so the God-given psyche and the earthbound animal body have to climb the ladder together as one. Before any of these steps can be approached, however, there are 2 pillars on either side at ground level. Like the chessboard floor, there is a good reason that they are at ground level, because both represent the dual nature of physical reality where everything seems to have poles. Polarity is indeed the foundation of tangible reality. We can't have up without down existing at the same time. We can't have a preference of good without simultaneously experiencing what we consider to be undesirable. In a way, this duality is why these philosophies exist in the first place. To ride on the current of universal law, we have to live in a world where things go against that very law, despite how futile the attempt. It's no spoiler that the entire world today seems to be grinding against the current of universal law. And that is what makes people who embrace these philosophies so rare. I saw a meme that was something along the lines of like, with everything being backwards, medicine destroying health, education destroying knowledge, churches destroying spirituality, and all of which doing so in the name of greed, it seems that the only way to be rebellious is to be a good person. And I suppose that we can call that a rebel with a cause. But how ironic that the only way to fight corruption in society is to become its opposite. If you fight fire with fire, you create more fire. Of course, it can be argued that fighting fire with fire has been a necessity in particular circumstances. But this is where the unification of opposites is the most critical. When something bad is done to rectify justice, it must be balanced back out in the aftermath. The hand that slays must also be used to lift the fallen. The lips that curse must also be used for prayer. And so, completely hypothetically speaking, if a man is taken out of the game because he gained wealth in a non-righteous manner, that wealth would be potentially taken on by the assailant. The assailant must turn around and distribute that very wealth to the community where it is needed and not pocket even a penny of it. This resistance of temptation is what unifies the opposites of the wrong that has been committed. You have heard your grandmother say that 2 wrongs don't make a right, and that's absolutely true. But if 2 wrongs do happen, it has to be doubly counteracted by good deed. Thus, the tension of the opposites are alleviated as if there is something greater keeping score. Because, well, there is. If he takes, he must now give. Through tears, he has learned to smile, and through death, he has learned to live. He looks for the higher things in the lower realms, and so the checkered board floor is there, on the ground and not on the ceiling. Because anyone in that room is walking above this duality. This duality is necessary to have a foundation in this tangible reality, and our body is stuck to it, but the mind can transcend it, sliding us right into our next bit of symbolism. At the top of these pictorial plates, we have the all-seeing eye, with the pyramid or Eye of Horus at the end or top of the staircase. We covered the mythology of Horus in a previous video, but let's take a look at this all-seeing eye that has become synonymous with evil due to the fact that it has been adopted by the $1 bill. Without getting too much into the history of the dollar, as it is not my genre here, it should be noted that the all-seeing eye was put on paper money in 1782. Long before the dollar became an IOU banknote backed by the labor of unknown slaves. Basically, the symbol was just transferred over from something backed by gold onto something of merciless extortion of the people. Check out the Dark Matters podcast for plenty on that.
On the dollar, the eagle has 32 feathers on its left-hand side and 33 feathers on its right. 33 is the number of vertebrae up our spine, Jacob's ladder, a number symbolising the raising of the kundalini and the activation of the pineal gland, so we can be born again. Numerology and the occult power of 13. There are 13 arrows on the Great Seal, symbolising war and the inability of man to defend himself against the coming New Age. There are 13 bars on the breastplate of the eagle, 7 white, the number of God, 6 black, 6 the hex, the number of man in the Vitruvian box, representing the spirit of man in matter. The 12 vertical lines on the plate denote governmental perfection in numerology. Government literally translating from the Latin governare, to control, mens the mind. E pluribus unum, meaning out of many one. The one world government formed from the 13. There are 13 levels to the cap pyramid. The capstone, the all-seeing eye, the eye of providence, Lucifer, the Black Sun, all names for Sirius. IHS, Isis, Horus, Set, the Jesuit bankers, the Vatican, creating the dead legal fiction, the all caps name, the straw man, decapitating your body from your head. Exodus 3:8, the land of milk, our pineal gland, and honey, our pituitary gland, our head, the Holy Grail. Annuit coeptus, Jupiter Almighty favour my bold undertakings. Jupiter, Peter meaning stone, the stone of the debt that Rome collects. Novus Ordo Seclorum, new order of the ages. A new world order based on depravity and rebellion. In God we trust, yet we must ask ourselves a deeper question. Just whose God is being referenced here?
The origin of the symbol may very well point to the unseen and formless sentience that pervades all matter. It's not just the eye of providence we see on the dollar bill where this is found. We see a single eye within a triangle in plenty of artwork all over the world, some of which not even necessarily associated with any religious sect. If the circle is divinity and the square is physicality, then the triangle seems to be a bridge between the two. With the eye at its center, it takes on a form of communion from above, or even guidance from the causal realms. And this is best personified by the Eye of Horus. That surely seems to look like the pineal gland within the brain. And what better a representation than that, considering that it is the pineal gland that is a transducer or a sort of radio receiver to pick up notions of divinity to be downloaded into this black cube of the physical vehicle. It is a way to capture the idea of piercing into the membrane of physical reality. And not so coincidentally, the triangle has a sharp point just to do just that. Masons are known to be builders of great architecture, as symbolized by the legend of Hiram Abiff building Solomon's Temple. This is a cornerstone of all trades and skills. This cornerstone so happens to serve as a perfect metaphor of how we use the skills we have developed to build on a higher vibratory foundation of existence. After a Mason has completed his earthly labor successfully, he may begin work on a higher plane than the average builder is safe to work on. This is why some versions of the legend of Hiram depict him being murdered by the 3 ruffians after he refused to drop knowledge per their request. They wanted to know something that they simply had not expanded enough to handle. This is not about hoarding knowledge, it is about keeping it safe. By giving pearls to pigs, the pearls will be desecrated in the filth. This is not to say that there is anything wrong with the pig or anything that it might symbolize, but that it is just still boxed up in that lower animal nature. When any sort of final judgment comes at the end of one's life, it is your own self that you will be answering to. This is what makes the cornerstone important. In literal terms, the cornerstone is the first block laid by the mason in the east corner of its foundation, because all philosophy, it is said, comes from the east, a way for the Western philosophers to give nod to the ancient Zen masters that have truly been there and done that before us. But there is a bit of irony to the Eastern set of the cornerstone, considering that the Zen masters did not bother to leave anything behind of their teachings, and the cornerstone is often used to give a message set in stone to future generations, typically just the dates of build. This is one of the only places where Eastern Zen and Western philosophy are divided, the desire to be remembered and to pass on knowledge. Symbolically, however, the cornerstone is what you do when no one is looking. It is the foundation of who you are without the risk of being caught. If you need a good way to gauge yourself in that regard, just take a look at how you treat people behind the screen online or in traffic where you will not be at risk of getting your teeth knocked out. Take a look at how you speak of others when that person is not around. Take a look at how you get out of bed in the morning when you don't have any formal obligations. Take a look at how you treat yourself when you are not expecting any company. This is your cornerstone, the first unit of your foundation. This is how well you are equipped to govern yourself, and so it is how qualified you are to govern others. Every government has a fear of secret societies. This is obvious when you see the way that they are propagated, even in independent media. But why? Well, this has everything to do with the conflicting goals of governments and secret societies. The reason a group would become a secret in the first place would be to escape the oppression of a government or other authoritarian figures such as religious elites, like the priests of the Vatican. What governments and organized religions have in common is the goal to control people through a game of dividing us into enemies and then conquering both sides with false promises of safety from the so-called other opposing team. When small groups within this madness wish to awaken their fellow men and women to their truest potentials, they would indeed be forced to do so in the shadows or be at great risk of dismantlement by the authoritarian egregore. This necessary secrecy would, of course, put that group under a lot of speculation and misunderstandings to the masses who are fooled by those who have assumed control. Basically, it is easy for a government or mainstream religious cult to paint an ill-hued picture of the secret society through propagated media to keep them feared and misunderstood despite the group's best attempts at helping humanity grow. If humanity grows, its controllability shrinks, because the next step of humanity seems to transcend the control of a governing force, as we would become sovereign beings without the need for guidance from these blind leaders. The most blatant way I've seen this done is when a government does something heinous and then just turns around and says that it was a secret society or a cult. The conspiracy peeps know this to be a false flag. This is a move that they certainly picked up from the church once upon a time. Works like a charm. And if the technique doesn't work, they will surely move on to more drastic measures. If we look back at the most famous assassinations of history, there is a common theme. They tend to kill off anyone who warns us about government blindness and control. People who lead by way of example concerning how to live harmoniously by becoming self-governed. Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, John Lennon, Muhammad, Jesus, The list goes on. You can look for yourself. It is safe to say that if one truly wants to better humanity down to the individual, they had better do so secretly. The martyr might die, but the good of the truth will survive the assassination, and in many cases be fueled by it. Many great figures who we are familiar with have been Freemasons, but did not publicly disclose their dedication to the brotherhood. Quite the opposite of your friend Sean, who just went down the street and applied and is now trying to get you to sign up after telling you that the G means God or geometry or something. Generative force. Some of my favorites are the sarcastic, sly guys like Mark Twain, Amadeus Mozart, Ben Franklin, Winston Churchill, and others who have quietly lived by the morals of this enigmatic group. And speaking of which, something said in our last video bears repeating here, that no person is at all obligated to take an oath or join into a fraternity in order to embody these ideals and standards of living. We can simply integrate the lessons of Masonic values into our daily life and thus accidentally spread this eternal spark of truth to this ever so distracted world. Each individual can play a small part in something big. They can impregnate society with a higher sense of purpose without preaching a gospel, simply by becoming one with the truth versus talking about it. Like Lao Tzu said, he who speaks does not know, and not a good start for me. The true Mason and or self-initiate understands that science and theology are two poles that must unite opposites in order to create a firm ground to build from. This is the foundation of the temple representing character. In this case, the character of an entire society. He understands that a person must endure either great sorrow or vigilant inner work to develop eyes tuned to see clearly. So in a way, he treats the world as a school, thus is always a student because he does not force himself into the position of teacher or correct others in their misconceptions, because he knows that he himself might be ill-conceived. Life does not bring light to man. It simply fills him with information and lessons. Turning that information into light is quite literally the alchemical process of the soul's evolution. This acceptance of information can only reflect that light back onto the world once it overflows in the individual. So in a way, man cannot be illuminated by outside sources. He has to create the illumination himself with the materials that he has been given. And there is never too few the amount of material. If we have learned anything from the ancient Zen masters, it is that illumination can surely come from nothing at all. So the question might come up, what does architecture have to do with this philosophy? Well, many religions have temples built outside of themselves to honor their own personal ideals of God. The Mason builds his temple within. He considers his character to be the temple and his self-mastery to be the Holy Grail. The world is his church, and he does not side with any particular dogma or political belief system. He realizes that the highest truth cannot be forced into our mental cognition through a specific teaching brought about by any individual group or specific way of thinking. The initiate will absorb many different forms or belief into his personal character without strictly adhering to any of them at all. Therefore, he or she is free from these limitations of belief and can kind of glean his or her own individual process. After all, belief is just like definition. It's a form of limitation. The moment that you take on a belief, you are excluding all other possibilities that may have never even occurred to you later in life after you have matured. The persistence and precision that is required to erect a literal building cannot float in mediocrity. If the exterior glass of a hospital lets in water, it will form mold and thus health problems for the patients. Profitable for the hospital, but bad for the people. circle, so the glazers do their work on 10, 100% of the time. If a building's foundation is not structurally sound in every single part of its skeleton, well, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and it could fall due to the vibrations of the earth. So the iron workers and the concrete guys also have to be on 10. The carpenters also have to, All right, moving on. The initiate applies this very same work ethic to his everyday behavior and treats his character as he would when erecting a building that has to be immaculate to stand the test of time. So with this, it is safe to say that one does not have to be in the field of architecture to understand the moral compass laid out by the Freemasons that creates absolute certitude. But this architectural symbology is how we get the square and compass symbol embraced by the Freemasons. Both are tools necessary in architecture, but also have an obvious parallel to spiritual growth. The compass is used to draw fine circles and absolute ratios when it comes to curves. The right angle of the square ensures perfection in every corner. And if you are a frequent viewer of this channel, I don't have to tell you that this represents what we call the squaring of the circle. This is an ancient concept that goes way back before prehistory. We see it in the pyramids and in even smaller symbolic geometrical groundwork like Serpent Mound of Ohio. This is best captured in the symbol of the Philosopher's Stone, where we see Hermes Trismegistus displaying his work. But without repeating too much of those older videos, the circle represents divinity and the structure of the higher realms, while the square represents the structure of physical matter. This is where we get the black cube mythology. So how about that G that's just always pestering everybody? As we mentioned earlier, it is often conceived that the G in the center represents geometry, God, or even Gnosis. And for good reason, because each of those fits the bill perfectly. But it seems that if you dig deep enough, the original meaning behind the G is for generative force, or genesis, so to speak. The creative principle put forth from all sentient life when the divine spark flows through it. If your creative genius is lacking, don't fear. You just have to find what it is that you are tuned to. Find the external thing, no matter how specific, that is a true reflection of what you are internally. Once you find that niche, become the architect of that craft. As long as your work is hinged solely on service to others, you will find it easy to flow down that river with your work. And you will profit from your endeavors, but of all the beneficiaries of your craft, you should put yourself last on the list. Start with looking around at what is needed in the world. Start small with your own children or neighbors, and offer your craft for free at first. This is a great way to open oneself to the power of Wu Wei, where, like water, flows effortlessly but can carve out mountains. The water's goal is to bring life to others, and by seeking the lowest point, this humility makes it immortal and essential. There is a quote often attributed to Carl Jung that he got from an anonymous alchemist, a quote that I certainly began to live by about 3 months before starting this channel. Carl said, "An old alchemist gave the following consolation to one of his disciples. No matter how isolated you are and how lonely you feel, if you do your work truly and conscientiously, unknown friends will come and seek you." Some might know the phrase better as, "if you build it, they will come." And it's absolutely true. I wrote Book of Wonderful Suffering for my son to have when I am gone. And you fast forward to today and here you all are. There are groups working in the shadows to bring the rest of us light. They understand that we have been deceived. How suiting this is, considering the goals and aspirations of these groups reflect that very theme on their sleeves. That is, to give without recognition, to do right while being accused of doing wrong. The building blocks of reality are irremovably math and geometry. This cosmic grid cannot be destroyed because it is that by which destruction can exist in the first place. But it can be extracted from. It is a structure, it is a building, and it is built by none other than Big Guns himself. And he has left his work unfinished on purpose. The work is unfinished because we are created to finish it. That is exactly how God experiences himself, through us. And God's work is no menial task. The members of these hidden groups die, but their philosophies funnel into another eon to utter the suppressed truths spoken by the hearts of us all, no matter how faint it speaks or how distracted we have been made from it. So gather up the tools of conduct and behavior set in stone by the members of the Grand Lodge, and do so without any form of initiation, unless so desired, and walk into reality while secure and sovereign with your own individual forms of tradition-breaking morals and dogma. Waiting for you at the top of the staircase is safety and righteousness, right thought, shepherded emotion, and correct action. And feel safe when you eventually meet the one who passes judgment on your cornerstone, because that judge is you. project reality. We collectively create this world. Many ancient myths and religions have, in one way or another, a reference to the waters of the deep. And it is always pertaining to a pre-existence, something that is void, yet the source of all things. We have the Tao, for example, which describes a constant flow of source energy that can't be depleted. It is said you can reach in and take out a scoop of it, and it will already be replenished despite you having had taken from it. In Christian lore, it is said that before the Word, that the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. So it would seem that nature is literally the image of God's word or frequency. The word or mind, sometimes called nous, N-O-U-S, molds matter according to its imagination. In Gnostic lore, we have the pleroma, a pre-existing state from which all things take form once we take chaos into our own hands to create order from it. In alchemy, we have the prima materia, or primordial material, that can be transmuted into anything, good or bad, selfish or unselfish, according to the alchemist that has mastered their craft. It is important to note that this is not to be confused with the materia prima, referred to in the literal alchemical transmutation of lead into gold or Saturn into sun, so to speak. But instead, prima materia is experienced as feelings of confusion, melancholy, and fear. Well, kind of like the darkness upon the face of the deep. That is not to be rid of, but transformed manually, just like the word mentioned above. The Hermetica mentions the Virgin of the World in a section called the Holiest Discourse, which is a library of information hidden away within the soul and only recovered through Gnosis. It is the Logos which is the activation of turning this sort of deep void of potential into the creative process. Speaking of Hermetics, it is mentioned in the Corpus Hermeticum that, and I quote, "coming to be is nothing but imagination." This seems to refer to the expansion and fine-tuning of our sentience based on the knowing of the self and purification of thought, making one worthy of tapping into that bottomless well of creative energy. And we will come back to that after the intro. But ancient peoples are certainly not the only ones who have described this world of endless nothingness bursting with endless potential, because we too in our modern age have a similar concept, a concept that was birthed from one of the most important scientific experiments of all time. And just like all of the others before us, we call it by a different name too. We call it the unified field. So, for an in-depth look at the hard science of the double slit experiment and measurement problem, I would like to refer you to the most awkward video on earth, my first video, that despite its bunk-ass quality breaks it down quite thoroughly. But basically, science has found that all reality kind of non-exists as a wave function or superposition of possible outcomes that can't be considered real until it is viewed. When this wave function meets a conscious entity like you, it collapses into a particle, and of course, particles are what our entire world is made out of. Unlike that video, today I would like to learn together how to harness that power that we already have inherently, that we accidentally use in every moment, so we can aim, so to speak, these wave functions of possible outcomes to better our own realities, thus the betterment of all human beings. The way to this, of course, will be to compare the cold, hard science to mythology and scriptures that has been pointing us in that direction all along. And unlike the cold, hard science with all its rules and no-nos, the ancients might have a few hints as to how to turn these universal laws into art and expression, transmuting chaos void into desired outcomes. It is important to know that this is not a New Age philosophy. There are those who know these techniques and keep it to themselves. After all, it was J.P. Morgan who said, "Millionaires don't use astrology and metaphysics. billionaires do. You know, sometimes these greedy fucks let little secrets slip. Nevertheless, manifestation is so much more simple when you let these laws engulf you by getting to know them like you do your buddy Nate. You got to bond with Nate before he upgrades to Nathan, and then of course evolves into his final form, Nathaniel. The Neoplatonic school of thought speaks of the anima mundi, a divine, all-pervading consciousness, infinite yet contains within it or gives birth to all finite possibilities, therefore connecting the eternal, changeless worlds to our temporary world. If that is a brain twister, think of the software that came with your PC called Paint Workshop. Already existing on that software is every single possible thing that you can paint with the software. It is already there on the computer. It is simply your personal ability or knowledge of that software that determines your capabilities to create artistic images with it. The better you know the software, the higher the quality of the images you can create. But everything that you create was already there in the program waiting for you to pull it out. And I mean, there's your as above, so below lesson of the day right there, buddy. Let's talk about this water thing that seems to be pointing to our wave function pre-collapse thing we got going on in science. Hermes, who I am not one to argue with, said, "In the deep there is a boundless water, fine intelligent spirit, and all existing divine power in chaos." And both Egyptian and Sumerian cosmogonies refer to this darkness or void as a fathomless sea. These philosophies, and all mentioned in our intro, from all over the world remind us of the science of the wave function collapsing into a particle when it comes into contact with a sentient being, like a scientist who measures it. It literally looks and acts like water flowing and rippling until the person, whether it be the scientists, alchemists, or sages, etc., see it and recognize it, causing it to become real, reality, a particle. This is beyond coincidence, and I find it difficult to believe that the scientists who discovered this wave function collapse weren't reminded of this deluge of ancient teachings that have been here since, hell, obviously before we can remember. But in all cases, a primordial chaos of pure potential only exists in an undifferentiated state until someone turns it into what we loosely call real. It is up to us now to decide what those waters of chaos become. The art of transmutation can be roughly symbolized in an ancient diagram. The outer circle is the depths of chaos potential or wave function, from which occurs the triangle of the three universal principles, most often referred to as the Holy Trinity. From the three is birthed a fourth, or the square, which represents the four elements, metaphorically speaking. That is, of course, the world that we can see and touch. And most importantly, the inner circle. The inner circle is us. And there is no coincidence that it is also a circle. They didn't just run out of shapes. It is showing us that we are the unification of all things that the outer circle of chaos contains. If I could refer us back to my cheesy paint workshop analogy, the raw software is the outer circle. The triangle is the purpose emerging from that. The square would be the tools used to create, and of course the inner circle is you, the artist, using all of the above to create this picture of a cat playing golf or whatever. This famous illustration called Atlanta Fuegians maybe, has a philosopher demonstrating how the inner and outer circle are one and the same, hinting at the idea of the philosopher's stone. The keys of this union are said by Manly P. Hall to be love, counsel, prudence, and law. And we should probably keep that part in mind. Jesus himself said, "Let your eye be single and your body will be filled with light." And although it is speculated that he was referring to the pineal gland and that may well be the case, it certainly does point to one of the oldest axioms that we have, to look within for answers and not to the external forces. Very much like the Buddha certainly had a good way of making sense of these complex teachings and making them very simple. Also keeping it simple, he told us to, quote, watch, one word, which is exactly what an inner eye would be meant to do. We certainly should keep watch of our thoughts from a safe distance in order to study the patterns that they take on. And of course, to better know that we are not our thoughts, as Eckhart Tolle has taught us. Identifying as our thoughts is something that we all accidentally do, and it leads to a lot of unnecessary suffering. After all, thoughts become words in action, and words in action become our reality. If we are to meditate deeply, this will inevitably lead us to a connection with the outer circle, the pure potential of the wave function. And while watching that, and paying close attention to that inner, thus outer self, we can effortlessly find the purpose behind our whole being here on earth thing that we got going on. We got to go directly to source with this. You are the guru. So the Bible states that we are children of light. Now, this brings us back to the wave function, as light acts like water. But what is light? Well, light is said to be made up of particles called photons, but we now recently know better than to call light a particle, as it just isn't. Instead, it seems to be an angle of what science has resorted to calling a messenger particle. The photons come from above, of course, the source being the sun. The sun is a depiction of eternal source in all alchemical symbology, because all that is and finite, including the moon, is only visible because it reflects the sun's light, or messenger particles. Here we get the hint that this is a representation of something deeper than the objective sun and moon. Basically, everything temporary comes from a nothing that is permanent. Keep this in mind for all of our videos here, as it is, like the art of sacrifice, key to this gnosis that we are seeking. Bill Donahue, a man considered to be mad by his church peers after he, being a preacher, began to teach what he called hidden meanings. He was quick to point out that both modern science and the Bible refer to a so-called wave offering. He likens light to be like sound, as they are both waves like fluid. Sound, of course, is just a frequency of vibration until it comes into contact with a person, where it is then identified and categorized. If you kind of see where I'm pointing here. We give birth from within us to what that wave of frequency objectively is and can be. Just like a person who is driving a car becomes the car, there are forces of light and sound that are driving us. Angled messenger particles, or messenger angels, if you want to get kind of fringe with it. And why not explore this fringe idea? I mean, all gigantic breakthroughs in science and society were once considered fringe. Am I wrong? Leonardo da Vinci, William Gilbert, Nicholas Copernicus, Nikola Tesla. It seems that the biggest influences in scientific thinking and modern technology came from spiritual people on the fringe, even today with the highly venerated Rupert Sheldrake. So I don't mind checking out Bill's ideas for a little minute. Let's look in the Bible at Numbers 6:20, where it says, "The priest shall wave them for a wave offering before the Lord." This is one of many references in the Bible of a so-called wave offering coming to man as a messenger. And what are angels' main purpose in the Bible? Well, they are messengers of God. God can't bring you the goods himself because your head would fucking explode if you saw him. Now, let's get back to science with the work of John Grivens, a respected physicist of London who found that when an electron vibrates, it attempts to radiate by producing a field, which is a wave going into both the future and the past. And, oh yeah, by the way, the quantum world does not give a fuck about linear time. Again, see that video mentioned above. But the offering wave going into the future remains a wave until it encounters an electron, which can absorb its fluid state and finally become fixed as a particle. So it is literally a kind of fluid that is seeking a fixed particle to be absorbed. I'm very much reminded right now of an old adage: people don't have ideas, ideas have people. We just have to listen and receive. And to listen and receive might involve renunciation of distractions like money, short skirts, and binge watching reruns of The Office. God, I still can't believe that I still can't believe that Kevin spilled the chili. Oh, that was a disaster. But again, there we have another big coincidence of modern science, ancient scriptures, and meditation teachings saying the same shit. But what modern science does not address is that this is, well, communion, that which is above, attempting to send a message to that which is below. And we are connected to that divine source by the mind. The mind, of course, being the creative force within us and without us, as the second thing ever that follows the primordial first cause, or nous. Nous being an ancient term for the creative mind. The nous was produced by the first cause in order to experience itself as another. So in a way, separate in concept despite being the same. We are reminded that, like thoughts, we are not the mind either. Therefore, the mind is there for us to harness its creative power with proper discipline. The same discipline that it takes to carry a heavy pot of chili to the Christmas party. You got to watch every step. But we are so distracted by all that is physical, earthly ordeals that we completely miss the point of what is being sent down, like the sun in abundance. It's like we can see the forest for the trees finally, but now need to recognize the web of relationships occurring in nature of that forest for the trees to be possible in the first place. If you have ever thrown a ball for a dog and the dog failed to see where the ball went, what did you do? Well, you pointed to the ball, didn't you? But how did the dog respond to that? Well, that lovable pup didn't follow your finger's path, did he? He just stared at your hand. He doesn't understand the concept of hand gestures unless trained to. And I'll repeat that, unless trained to. I implore you that we are that dog staring at the master's physical hand for answers, but completely missing the point. The point. That one was an accident. No, it wasn't. I wrote it in my notes. That might be that joke might edit out on that. Not my best work. The point. No, I'm trying. Speaking of parallels between science and ancient wisdom, it is said by science that the early universe was threaded like that of a spider's web. And they say those words, spider's web. We, of course, can't help but be reminded that so many sacred texts speak of the cosmos as exactly that, a web of life of which all parts reflect the myriad of other parts and are indeed one and the same. Just as we, the inner circle, are one and the same as the outer circle. This should be no surprise because what is our physical body made of? Stardust. And what is our world made of? Stardust. And you already know who is quoted as saying the famous phrase, "I am that." So who or what is that? You need some paper? It's all good. So who or what is that spider then? Well, astrophysicists have recently concluded that the universe is shaped dimensionally like a brain, that of 11 or more dimensions. Thoth, the Atlantean, of course, thousands of years before them, said that the all is mind, the universe is mental. So who or what is the spider weaving the web? You guessed it, it's the guesser themselves. The spider is you, the inner circle that reflects the image of the outer circle. No matter which path you look at it from, science, theology, hermetics, alchemy, mythology, etc., it seems we project reality. We control the universe because it is us quite literally. But we are so distracted by the circus world that we have failed to receive that heavenly gift, just like the dog that we spoke of above. And this being distracted is by design, by the way. See our video, Systems of Control, for more on that. Heads up, that's a really dark one. Intelligent light seeks intelligent light. This is manifestation point blank. Religious people are not allowed to look at the science, and the scientist is not allowed to look at religion, which frankly explains it better, or I should say more personable with more heart. But here we are again and again, two sides explaining exactly the same thing. I mean, when are we going to grow up? We are the universe experiencing itself, a notion that both Carl Sagan and Alan Watts can agree on. Both men who I think we all hold dear in our hearts who are no longer with us. In that same breath, I might say that we are God experiencing itself by the separation of the nous. To say that we don't have a purpose or any other nihilistic concept is just absurd at this point of our gnosis. I mean, look at the stars and then close your eyes and look within and tell me you don't feel that. It's there. It's always been there. Before you were born and after your body dies. It is and it always will be. It's beckoning, calling out to you, evolving through you, up and forward if we are to remember the keys passed down to us by Manly P. Hall mentioned above. As within, so without. As the universe, so is the soul. Could it really be that simple? Well, let's find out. Let's take everything we have learned today and throw it away, if only for a moment. Forget the complexities, forget the details, forget your dharmic duties, forget that Kevin spilled the chili, forget everything and empty your cup with sincerity and completely surrender the results, because that monkey mind chatter will only get in the way of the divine messages that are blasting your ass 24/7, like the sun blasting your new redheaded girlfriend that thought hours of drinks on the beach would be a good idea. Hey, wait a second. Ariel, you know, the mermaid. She was a redhead who never saw the sun. How did she deal with sunburn? And by the way, she was 16, right? And Eric was 25? Dude, what the It's a good thing she had no voice. She'd be bitching 24/7 about him buying the cheap SPF sunscreen. What the fuck was I talking about? All right, back on track. Well, actually, here, I might as well plug this bitch. I don't know if you guys saw the community chat. You can check that out every once in a while. I'll see this on screen. Library of the Untold t-shirts are popping. All right, you got your logo there with the Philosopher stone on the back. All right, and I know all y'all are big fans of Abraxas and the Buddha Brat. It all comes together. You can thank my daughter for the design. These things are high quality. They're good. This one's got cat hair on it. Yours will too, for an extra cost. No, I'm just kidding. The cat hair is free. That joke wasn't in the script. I made it up on the spot. I know, it's crowd work in this bitch. All right. So sit down, close your eyes and relax. Breathe deep as perhaps the Wim Hof method, which is my favorite, but you know, you do you. But get into that state one way or another. Drop the idea of talking to yourself as being silly. It isn't. Remember that you are not the mind. It will answer you. Ask yourself, what is my potential realized? And then shut the fuck up for a damn minute and let it speak to you, because it will. It might take more than once to get the full scope, but it will. The fact of the matter is that it doesn't matter how you do it. It only matters that you do. This means renunciation of the external world and the dark, uncomfortable confrontation with the worlds within. The dark that leads us to light. the chaos that leads to purpose, the sacrifice that leads to pleasure. Or as Carl put it, the absurdity that leads to meaning. Sometimes it's best that we stop seeking it and let it find you. The ball is already in the yard. Stop looking at the hand and start understanding what the hand is pointing to.
Awaken.